July 1975, Muhammad Ali receives $1 million offer to fight in Africa. But this wasn't the rumble in the jungle. This was an invitation from a man known as the Butcher of Uganda, a former boxer turned dictator who kept his opponents' heads as trophies. What followed would become one of the most chilling episodes in sports history. What could possibly bring these two larger-than-life personalities together? The answer lies in one of the most fascinating yet overlooked chapters of 20th century history. To understand this encounter, we need to step back. 1975 was a year of seismic shifts. The Vietnam War was drawing to its chaotic close. The Cold War had divided the globe into opposing camps, and Africa was transforming forever. But our story begins with two men whose lives shared striking parallels. Both rose from humble beginnings. Both found fame in the boxing ring. Both possessed a natural charisma that drew people to them. And both would leave an indelible mark on history, though in radically different ways. Let's start with Muhammad Ali. By 1975, he had already lived several lifetimes worth of drama. The Louisville Lip, who became Olympic gold medalist Cassius Clay. The controversial convert to Islam who sacrificed his title for his beliefs. The outspoken critic of the Vietnam War who lost 3 years of his prime but gained a moral authority that transcended sports. And now, once again, the heavyweight champion of the world. His victory over George Foreman in Zaire had elevated him from mere sports star to global icon. When Muhammad Ali spoke, the whole world listened. His words carried weight not just in America, but in Africa, Asia, and everywhere people dreamed of standing up to power. He was more than an athlete. He was a symbol of resistance, of black pride, of religious conviction. Then there was Idi Amin. Like Ali, he too had been a boxer, winning Uganda's heavyweight championship during the colonial era. His imposing physical presence, 6'4" and over 230 pounds, matched his outsized personality. But where Ali's charisma was backed by principle, Idi Amin's charm masked something far more sinister. Rising through the ranks of the British colonial army, Idi Amin seized power in Uganda through a military coup in 1971. What followed was one of the darkest chapters in African history. Under his rule, Uganda became a place of terror. Journalists estimated that 300,000 people disappeared into his torture chambers. Political opponents vanished without trace. The country's Asian minority was expelled, devastating the economy. Yet somehow, Idi Amin maintained a bizarre presence on the world stage. One moment he was writing rambling letters to world leaders, claiming to be the uncrowned King of Scotland. The next, he was hosting international conferences and entertaining foreign diplomats. His unpredictability made him both laughable and terrifying. In 1975, the world watched Uganda with unease. Reports of mass killings and disappearances mounted. Western nations cut ties, but Idi Amin sought legitimacy to appear more than just another African dictator. And that's where Muhammad Ali entered the picture. For Idi Amin, Muhammad Ali represented something invaluable: legitimacy. The most famous Muslim athlete in the world, a symbol of black pride and power, coming to Uganda. It would be a propaganda coup beyond measure. But what did Muhammad Ali hope to gain from this meeting? Why would the man who had stood up to the US government on principle now shake hands with a dictator? The answer involves a complex web of politics, religion, and ambition that would shape not just their meeting, but its impact on history. Before Muhammad Ali set foot in Uganda, secret meetings would take place, revealing the true stakes of this encounter. What was on the line was far more than anyone imagined. The invitation arrived at Muhammad Ali's training camp in the spring of 1975. Written on official Ugandan government stationery, with Idi Amin's personal seal prominently displayed, it was an offer that caught everyone's attention. The dictator wasn't just inviting Muhammad Ali to visit, he was promising a hero's welcome, complete with state honors and a personal tour of Uganda. But this wasn't just any diplomatic outreach. Idi Amin had carefully timed his invitation. Muhammad Ali was at the peak of his global influence, fresh from his triumphant victory in Zaire. The rumble in the jungle had demonstrated Muhammad Ali's unique ability to transcend sports and politics, turning a boxing match into a celebration of African pride. Idi Amin wanted to capture some of that magic for himself. The international reaction was swift and divided. Western diplomats were horrified. The US State Department, already dealing with the complicated aftermath of Muhammad Ali's anti-Vietnam stance, now faced the prospect of America's most famous Muslim potentially legitimizing one of Africa's most notorious dictators. They immediately began back-channel efforts to discourage the visit. The British Foreign Office was equally alarmed. Having watched their former colony descend into chaos under Idi Amin's rule, they saw Muhammad Ali's potential visit as a propaganda disaster in the making. Secret diplomatic cables from the period reveal frantic discussions about how to prevent the meeting without making it appear that the West was trying to control Muhammad Ali's movements. But not everyone opposed the visit. Several African leaders saw it as a potential opportunity. If anyone could influence Amin, maybe it was Ali. The boxer's moral authority, especially in the Muslim world, might be able to achieve what traditional diplomacy had failed to do: moderate Idi Amin's brutal regime. The Arab world was particularly interested in the proposed meeting. Muhammad Ali's conversion to Islam had made him a hero across the Middle East, and Idi Amin's own Muslim faith, despite his actions, created what some saw as a potential bridge. Several Arab nations quietly encouraged Muhammad Ali to accept the invitation, seeing an opportunity to establish new diplomatic channels. Don Herbert, Muhammad Ali's publicist at the time, later revealed the intense discussions that took place within Muhammad Ali's inner circle. Muhammad saw it differently than everyone else, Herbert recalled. He believed he could reach anyone through dialogue. He'd say, "If I can get in a room with somebody, I can change their mind." Ali himself was intrigued by the invitation. He had long seen his role as more than just a boxer. His journey to Africa for the Foreman fight had deeply affected him, strengthening his belief in sports diplomacy. He began to view the Uganda invitation as a potential extension of that mission, using his celebrity to open doors that traditional diplomacy couldn't. But Muhammad Ali wasn't naive. He understood the risks. His team conducted extensive research on Uganda's situation, gathering reports from human rights organizations and speaking with African diplomats. The picture they painted was grim: systematic killings, disappearances, torture chambers. Yet Muhammad Ali remained convinced that engagement was better than isolation. The media reaction was explosive. Headlines ranged from "Ali to dance with the devil" to "The greatest meets the beast." Editorial pages debated the ethics, while sports columnists questioned whether Ali was being manipulated. Behind the scenes, an elaborate diplomatic dance was taking place. Amin's representatives were in contact with Ali's team, negotiating details of the proposed visit. The dictator wanted maximum publicity: parades, public appearances, joint prayer sessions at Uganda's mosque. He suggested a friendly exhibition match. As the weeks passed, the stakes grew higher. What had started as a simple invitation had evolved into a complex international incident. The Cold War context added another layer of complexity. The Soviet Union, which had been supplying arms to Idi Amin's regime, watched with interest as the West struggled to prevent the visit. Muhammad Ali's final decision would have implications far beyond sports or politics. It would test the limits of his belief in dialogue over isolation, in the power of personal diplomacy over official channels. And it would raise profound questions about the role of athletes in international relations. The world held its breath as Muhammad Ali prepared to make his choice. But what no one knew at the time was that forces were already in motion that would make this meeting not just controversial, but potentially dangerous. The true nature of Idi Amin's invitation and his real plans for Muhammad Ali's visit were about to become clear. June 1975. Muhammad Ali's private jet touched down at Entebbe International Airport under the scorching Ugandan sun. The scene that greeted him was unlike anything he'd experienced before, and he'd experienced plenty. Thousands of Ugandans lined the tarmac, many holding hand-painted signs declaring, "Welcome home, Brother Muhammad." But this wasn't just any welcoming committee. Idi Amin had orchestrated a reception that blended military pageantry with theatrical excess. The dictator's personal guard, dressed in their distinctive red berets, formed an honor corridor. Traditional dancers performed while military bands played both the Ugandan national anthem and, surprisingly, the Star-Spangled Banner. Idi Amin himself stood at the foot of the aircraft stairs, wearing his signature military uniform, adorned with countless medals, many of which he'd awarded himself. As Muhammad Ali descended, the contrast between the two men was striking. The boxer wore a simple white Islamic robe, while the dictator seemed to be wearing his entire military decoration collection. Their first handshake became an instant media sensation. Here was Ali, who had refused to step forward when drafted to fight in Vietnam, now clasping hands with a man responsible for more deaths than many military conflicts. The photographer's cameras clicked frantically, capturing what would become one of the most controversial images of Muhammad Ali's career. What followed was a carefully choreographed 4-day visit that veered between the surreal and the deeply unsettling. Amin, ever the showman, had prepared a schedule that would keep Muhammad Ali constantly on display. The first stop was a massive rally in Kampala's Independence Square, where Idi Amin introduced Muhammad Ali as "my brother in Islam and my friend in boxing." Ali, known for his quick wit and sharp tongue, seemed unusually reserved during his public appearances. Those close to him later revealed that he had been shocked by what he saw beneath Uganda's carefully maintained facade. Between official events, he witnessed the fear in people's eyes when Idi Amin's name was mentioned. He noted the conspicuous absence of certain ethnic groups in government offices. The boxing exhibition, which had been heavily promoted, proved particularly memorable. Amin, who still considered himself a boxer, insisted on sparring with Ali. The resulting 3-minute session was a strange dance. Muhammad Ali clearly pulling his punches while Amin, 60 pounds heavier and decidedly less agile, attempted to land theatrical blows for the cameras. But it was during the private moments that the true dynamics of this meeting emerged. Don King, who had accompanied Ali, later wrote in his memoirs about a dinner at the presidential palace that turned chilling. Amin, several glasses of wine into the evening, despite his proclaimed Muslim faith, began regaling them with stories of his military conquests. The details made even the hardened boxing promoter uncomfortable. Muhammad Ali's visit to Kampala's main mosque revealed another layer of complexity. While Idi Amin portrayed himself as a defender of Islam, local Muslim leaders quietly informed Muhammad Ali about the persecution of religious minorities, including Muslim sects that Idi Amin disapproved of. Perhaps the most revealing moment came during an unscheduled stop at a local school. Away from the official cameras, Muhammad Ali spent an hour with Ugandan children, showing them boxing moves and reciting his famous poems. Witnesses noted that this was the only time during the visit when his familiar sparkle returned, only to fade when Idi Amin's officials hurriedly ended the impromptu session. The international press corps following the visit noted the increasing tension in Muhammad Ali's demeanor. The man known for his perpetual motion seemed to grow still, his legendary wit muted. During press conferences, he stuck to diplomatic platitudes, a far cry from his usual provocative statements. On the final day, Idi Amin presented Muhammad Ali with the Ugandan Order of Merit, the country's highest civilian honor. The ceremony, broadcast live on Ugandan television, showed two men who had started the visit as brothers, now standing apart in more ways than one. Muhammad Ali's acceptance speech was notably brief, lacking his trademark flair. As Muhammad Ali's plane lifted off from Entebbe, both men had achieved their superficial goals. Idi Amin had his propaganda photos, showing the world's most famous Muslim athlete embracing his regime. Muhammad Ali had completed his mission of sports diplomacy, maintaining his role as a global ambassador. But the true impact of this meeting was yet to be understood. In the coming months, as Uganda's situation deteriorated further, Muhammad Ali would face difficult questions about his visit, and in private moments, those closest to him would hear him wrestle with what he had witnessed and what he wished he had said or done differently. The meeting of the greatest and the monster had concluded, but its repercussions would echo through history, raising enduring questions about the role of athletes in international diplomacy, the limits of engagement with dictators, and the price of silence in the face of tyranny. Before Muhammad Ali's historic meeting with Amin, African boxing existed largely in the shadows of international sports. But this encounter, controversial as it was, sparked an unexpected renaissance that would transform the continent's boxing landscape forever. The story actually begins in the colonial era, when boxing was introduced as a tool of civilizing influence by European powers. Uganda, like many African nations, had developed a strong boxing tradition under British rule. Idi Amin himself was a product of this system, having won the Ugandan heavyweight championship in the 1950s, a fact he never tired of mentioning during Muhammad Ali's visit. But it was Muhammad Ali's earlier fight in Zaire, the Rumble in the Jungle, that had first ignited Africa's boxing imagination. When he knocked out George Foreman in Kinshasa, Ali didn't just win a fight, he provided a powerful symbol of African pride. "I did this for all Africa," he declared after the victory, and the continent embraced him as their own. The Uganda visit, despite its political complications, amplified this effect. In the weeks following Muhammad Ali's departure, boxing gyms across East Africa reported unprecedented surges in enrollment. Young men from Kampala to Nairobi, from Dar es Salaam to Addis Ababa, flocked to learn the sport that had produced both a global icon and, in their own backyard, a president. Muhammad Ali's training methods, which he had demonstrated during public sessions in Uganda, revolutionized African boxing. His emphasis on speed and footwork, rather than raw power, was particularly influential. Traditional African boxing had focused on strength and endurance, influenced by military training methods. Muhammad Ali showed them a different way, one that suited the generally lighter builds of East African athletes. The impact was immediate and measurable. Within months, Ugandan boxing officials reported a 300% increase in amateur boxing registrations. The Ali style became the dominant form taught in African gyms, with his rope-a-dope strategy and dancing footwork particularly popular among younger fighters. But the Renaissance wasn't limited to technique. Muhammad Ali's visit had demonstrated something more profound, that African boxers could compete on the world stage. His presence legitimized African boxing in a way no amount of local success could have achieved. As one Ugandan coach later recalled, "After Muhammad Ali came, our boxers stopped seeing themselves as African boxers. They just saw themselves as boxers, period." The transformation wasn't without its complications. Idi Amin's regime attempted to capitalize on the boxing boom, establishing state-sponsored training programs that mixed sports with military training. These programs, while producing some talented fighters, also served as recruitment tools for Idi Amin's notorious security forces. Yet even this dark aspect couldn't suppress the genuine grassroots movement that had begun. Independent boxing clubs sprang up across the continent, many named after Ali. These became more than just training facilities. They were community centers, youth programs, and in some cases, havens from political turmoil. The technical evolution of African boxing during this period was remarkable. Trainers began blending Muhammad Ali's modern techniques with traditional African fighting styles, creating a unique hybrid approach. This African school of boxing would later influence fighters worldwide, particularly in its emphasis on rhythm and movement. The impact on amateur boxing was particularly significant. In the years following Muhammad Ali's visit, African nations saw unprecedented success in international competitions. Uganda, despite its political isolation, produced several Olympic medalists. Kenya, Tanzania, and Nigeria developed strong boxing programs that continue to this day. Perhaps most importantly, Muhammad Ali's visit challenged the narrative about African boxing. No longer was it seen as merely a colonial legacy or a path to military service. Instead, it became a legitimate sporting pursuit, one that could bring international recognition and success. The sight of Ali, a black Muslim champion, standing as an equal with an African leader, however controversial that leader might be, sent a powerful message about possibilities and potential. The legacy of this renaissance continues to influence African boxing today. Modern champions like Samuel Peter of Nigeria and Azuma Nelson of Ghana have acknowledged their debt to the post-Ali transformation of African boxing. Training methods developed during this period are still used in gyms across the continent. What began as a controversial diplomatic visit had unleashed forces that transcended politics. The African boxing renaissance demonstrated the power of sport to inspire change, even in the most challenging circumstances. As one veteran Ugandan trainer put it, Ali showed us that boxing was more than just fighting. It was an art form, a way of expression, a path to dignity. In the end, the greatest impact of Muhammad Ali's meeting with Idi Amin may not have been political at all, but rather in how it transformed a sport and inspired a generation of African athletes to dream bigger than they ever had before. The meeting between Muhammad Ali and Idi Amin wasn't just a sporting event or diplomatic curiosity, it was a calculated move in the complex chess game of Cold War politics. To understand its true significance, we need to examine the invisible lines of power that ran through Africa in 1975. The Soviet Union had been steadily expanding its influence across Africa, offering military support and economic aid to newly independent nations. Uganda, under Idi Amin's rule, had become a particularly important piece on this global chessboard. After breaking ties with traditional Western allies, Idi Amin had turned to the Soviets for military hardware and technical advisors. The Soviets saw Uganda as a strategic foothold in East Africa, revealed newly declassified CIA documents from 1975. Idi Amin's invitation to Muhammad Ali wasn't just about sports diplomacy, it was about showcasing Soviet influence in the region. The presence of Soviet military advisors during Muhammad Ali's visit was carefully documented by Western intelligence agencies. The US State Department found itself in an impossible position. They couldn't openly prevent Muhammad Ali from traveling. That would have sparked accusations of restricting his freedom, especially given his history with the government over Vietnam. Yet they watched with growing alarm as Idi Amin attempted to use Muhammad Ali's visit to legitimize his Soviet-backed regime. Henry Kissinger, then Secretary of State, wrote in a classified memo, "The Muhammad Ali situation represents a unique challenge. His status as both a sports icon and a prominent Muslim figure makes direct intervention impossible. We must find subtle ways to minimize the propaganda value of this visit." Behind the scenes, a frantic diplomatic effort was underway. The State Department reached out to Muhammad Ali's team through intermediaries, providing detailed briefings about the situation in Uganda. They emphasized the Soviet military presence and Idi Amin's growing alignment with Moscow. But Ali, ever the independent thinker, seemed more interested in the potential for peaceful dialogue than Cold War politics. The Soviets, meanwhile, saw an opportunity to score a propaganda victory. Their media outlets gave extensive coverage to the visit, presenting it as evidence that prominent Americans were willing to engage with Soviet-aligned African nations. Radio Moscow broadcast daily updates in multiple languages, reaching audiences across Africa and the Middle East. What many didn't realize at the time was that the KGB had agents embedded in Idi Amin's inner circle. Recently released Soviet archives reveal that they played a role in orchestrating certain aspects of Muhammad Ali's visit, particularly the public events that would generate the most impactful propaganda images. The Chinese, pursuing their own influence in Africa, watched the situation with keen interest. They had been building relationships across the continent through infrastructure projects and economic partnerships. Muhammad Ali's visit to a Soviet-aligned African state represented both a challenge and an opportunity for their diplomatic efforts. Perhaps the most fascinating aspect was how Muhammad Ali himself navigated these complex political waters. Despite his lack of formal diplomatic training, he seemed to intuitively understand the stakes involved. During public appearances, he carefully avoided endorsing either superpower's agenda, focusing instead on messages of African unity and Islamic brotherhood. The British Foreign Office, still struggling with the aftermath of colonial withdrawal from Uganda, maintained careful surveillance of the visit. Their diplomatic cables, recently declassified, reveal deep concern about the potential impact on East African stability. Muhammad Ali's presence adds a dangerous legitimacy to Idi Amin's regime at precisely the moment when international pressure is most needed, one senior diplomat warned. Intelligence agencies from multiple nations monitored the visit closely. The CIA station in Kampala reported unusual levels of Soviet military activity during Muhammad Ali's stay. Israeli intelligence, concerned about Idi Amin's increasingly hostile stance toward Israel, tracked every meeting and public appearance. The visit had unintended consequences for Cold War dynamics in Africa. Other Soviet-aligned leaders began seeking similar high-profile visits from Western celebrities and athletes, hoping to replicate Idi Amin's propaganda success. This led to what one State Department analyst called celebrity diplomacy syndrome, the use of famous personalities to break through diplomatic isolation. What emerged from this complex web of international interests was a new understanding of how sports figures could influence global politics. Muhammad Ali's visit demonstrated that athletes could no longer be viewed as merely cultural ambassadors. They had become potential players in geopolitical strategy. The Cold War context of Muhammad Ali's Uganda visit reveals how even a seemingly straightforward sporting encounter could become entangled in global power politics. It marked a moment when the worlds of sports, diplomacy, and superpower rivalry converged in unexpected ways, creating ripples that would influence international relations for years to come. The religious aspect of Muhammad Ali's meeting with Idi Amin added a profound and complex layer to their encounter. Both men were Muslim converts who had changed their names and publicly embraced Islam, but their interpretations and implementations of the faith couldn't have been more different. Muhammad Ali's conversion to Islam through the Nation of Islam and later to Sunni Islam had been a journey of personal conviction. His famous declaration, "I ain't got no quarrel with them Viet Cong, no Viet Cong ever called me nigger," was deeply rooted in his Islamic principles of justice and brotherhood. By 1975, he had become not just a sports icon, but one of the most visible Muslims in the Western world. "When I arrived in Uganda," Muhammad Ali later wrote in his memoirs, "I thought I was coming to meet a fellow Muslim leader. What I found was something very different." This understated observation masked a deep disillusionment that would later emerge in private conversations with his closest confidants. Idi Amin's relationship with Islam was more complicated. Though he presented himself as a defender of the faith, ordering the construction of numerous mosques across Uganda, his practices often contradicted Islamic teachings. Reports of his brutal regime's actions against fellow Muslims, particularly those from different sects, had reached the Middle East and caused considerable concern. During Muhammad Ali's visit, Idi Amin orchestrated elaborate religious ceremonies. The largest was at Kampala's main mosque, where thousands gathered to see the two men pray together. It was a powerful image, the world's most famous Muslim athlete kneeling beside an African Muslim leader, but beneath the surface, tension simmered. Local Muslim leaders secretly passed messages to Ali, describing the persecution of religious minorities under Idi Amin's rule. One imam, risking his life, provided detailed accounts of how Idi Amin's regime had targeted Muslim scholars who questioned his interpretation of Islamic law. These revelations deeply troubled Ali, who had always viewed Islam as a religion of peace and justice. The Muslim world's reaction to the meeting was mixed. While some Arab nations saw it as a positive step toward unity between African and Arab Muslims, others were concerned about Muhammad Ali lending credibility to Idi Amin's regime. The Al-Azhar University in Cairo, one of Islam's most prestigious institutions, issued a carefully worded statement that neither condemned nor endorsed the meeting. What many observers missed was the subtle religious diplomacy Muhammad Ali attempted during his visit. In his public speeches, he consistently emphasized Islamic principles of mercy, justice, and human dignity. These messages, while diplomatic enough to avoid offending his host, carried clear implications for those who understood Islamic teachings. During a visit to a local madrasa, Islamic school, Muhammad Ali spoke about Malcolm X's influence on his understanding of Islam. "True Islam taught me that it judges a man by his heart, not by the color of his skin," he told the students. The message wasn't lost on observers. It was a subtle critique of Idi Amin's tribal and racial policies. The visit also highlighted the complex relationship between Islam and African identity. Ali, who had embraced Islam as part of his rejection of what he saw as white supremacy, found himself confronting an African Muslim leader who used religion to justify oppression. This paradox would later influence his thinking about the intersection of faith, power, and justice. Perhaps the most poignant moment came during an unplanned visit to a small mosque in a poor neighborhood of Kampala. Away from the cameras and official entourage, Muhammad Ali spent time with local Muslims who shared their daily struggles. One elderly man, speaking through an interpreter, told Ali, "We pray for a leader who truly follows the Prophet's example of mercy." Muhammad Ali's silence in response spoke volumes. The Islamic dimension of the Muhammad Ali-Idi Amin meeting ultimately raised crucial questions about the role of religion in politics and leadership. It demonstrated how faith could be both a unifying force and a tool of oppression, depending on how it was interpreted and implemented. For Ali, the experience seems to have deepened his commitment to representing what he saw as true Islamic values. In subsequent years, he became more vocal about the need for Muslims to stand against injustice, even when it came from within their own community. The legacy of this religious aspect continues to resonate today, as discussions about Islam, political power, and human rights remain relevant. The meeting between Muhammad Ali and Idi Amin serves as a historical reminder that sharing a faith doesn't necessarily mean sharing values, and that religious identity alone doesn't guarantee ethical leadership. The global media coverage of Muhammad Ali's visit to Uganda created a storm of controversy that would reshape public opinion about both men. Every major news outlet in the world scrambled to interpret this unprecedented meeting between boxing's greatest champion and Africa's most notorious dictator. Western media outlets were overwhelmingly critical. The New York Times ran the headline, "Ali dances with the devil," while the London Times questioned, "Has the greatest lost his way?" Television news programs showed carefully selected clips that emphasized the apparent friendship between Muhammad Ali and Amin, often juxtaposed with reports of Uganda's human rights violations. "I watched as my colleagues struggled to make sense of it," recalled Peter Arnett, then a veteran foreign correspondent. Here was Muhammad Ali, who had sacrificed his title for his principles during Vietnam, seemingly embracing a dictator. The contradiction was impossible to ignore. African media presented a starkly different narrative. Newspapers across the continent celebrated the visit as a triumph of African pride. The Kenya Nation declared, "Ali brings glory to East Africa," while Tanzania's Daily News focused on the cultural significance of the world's most famous Muslim athlete choosing to visit an African nation. But it was Uganda's state-controlled media that took the coverage to surreal levels. Daily broadcasts showed endless loops of Muhammad Ali and Idi Amin together, carefully edited to emphasize their apparent brotherhood. The government newspaper, Voice of Uganda, published special editions featuring poems about the two great African warriors united in strength and faith. The Arab world's media coverage reflected complex regional politics. While some outlets praised the meeting as an example of Islamic unity, others subtly questioned the authenticity of Idi Amin's religious credentials. Al-Ahram, Egypt's leading newspaper, ran a nuanced analysis that celebrated Muhammad Ali while barely mentioning Amin. Behind the scenes, journalists struggled with censorship and intimidation. Foreign correspondents in Uganda reported having their movements restricted and their stories monitored. Several Western journalists were expelled for unfavorable coverage. BBC correspondent John Simpson later wrote, "It was like watching a carefully choreographed play where everyone knew their lines, but nobody dared speak the truth." The public response was equally divided. In the United States, Muhammad Ali faced unprecedented criticism from civil rights leaders who had long supported him. James Baldwin wrote a scathing essay questioning how the man who refused to fight in Vietnam could shake hands with a mass murderer. Yet, in Africa, particularly among young people, the visit sparked enthusiasm. Letters poured into African newspapers defending Muhammad Ali's decision to engage with an African leader, regardless of Western opinion. One student in Lagos wrote, "Ali shows us that Africa matters, that we cannot be ignored." The international sports community found itself in an uncomfortable position. Boxing organizations, which had previously stripped Muhammad Ali of his titles for his political stands, now watched as he engaged in what many viewed as sports diplomacy gone wrong. The World Boxing Council issued a carefully worded statement that neither condemned nor supported the visit. Perhaps most fascinating was the response from the Muslim world's public. While official religious leaders remained diplomatic, heated debates erupted in mosques and Islamic centers worldwide. Many questioned whether Muhammad Ali's visit gave religious legitimacy to Idi Amin's regime. Others argued that engagement was better than isolation. The Soviet bloc's media presented yet another perspective, portraying the visit as evidence of growing African independence from Western influence. Radio Moscow's African service broadcast extensive coverage, carefully emphasizing moments when Muhammad Ali appeared to criticize Western policies. The emergence of photographic evidence added another dimension to the public reaction. Images of Muhammad Ali and Idi Amin boxing together, praying side by side, or sharing jokes became powerful propaganda tools. These photos would be recycled for years, their meaning and interpretation changing with the political winds. As the immediate controversy faded, a more nuanced public discussion emerged. Academics and political analysts began examining the visit as a case study in the complexities of sports diplomacy. Questions arose about the responsibilities of athletes when confronted with political realities and the line between engagement and endorsement. The media coverage and public response to Muhammad Ali's Uganda visit ultimately revealed more about the observers than the observed. It showed how the same event could be interpreted radically differently depending on perspective, prejudice, and political agenda. In many ways, the reactions to the visit became as historically significant as the visit itself. Nearly half a century later, the meeting between Muhammad Ali and Idi Amin continues to resonate, influencing everything from sports diplomacy to international relations. Its legacy offers crucial lessons about celebrity, power, and moral responsibility in an increasingly interconnected world. The immediate aftermath proved challenging for Ali. His reputation, particularly in the West, took a significant hit. The man who had been celebrated for his principled stand against the Vietnam War now faced accusations of legitimizing a brutal dictator. Yet time would reveal more complex dimensions to his Uganda visit. Looking back, recalled Howard Bingham, Muhammad Ali's longtime photographer and confidant, Muhammad never publicly criticized himself for going to Uganda, but he spoke privately about the weight of what he'd witnessed. It changed how he approached similar invitations in the future. The visit's impact on sports diplomacy was profound and lasting. It established both the potential and pitfalls of using athletic celebrities as unofficial ambassadors. Modern sports stars facing similar dilemmas, whether to compete in countries with questionable human rights records, often reference Muhammad Ali's Uganda experience in their deliberations. When LeBron James faced criticism for his stance on China in 2019, commentators immediately drew parallels to Muhammad Ali's Uganda visit. The fundamental question remained the same: what are the responsibilities of athletes when confronted with political realities? Where is the line between engagement and endorsement? The episode also transformed how international sports organizations approach diplomatic situations. The International Olympic Committee and FIFA have developed extensive protocols for handling politically sensitive situations, many directly influenced by the lessons learned from Muhammad Ali's Uganda experience. In Africa, the visit's legacy is particularly complex. While Idi Amin's regime crumbled into infamous brutality, the image of Muhammad Ali in Uganda inspired a generation of African athletes to see themselves as potential global figures. Ali showed us that African sports could have a voice in world affairs, noted Kenyan running legend Kip Keino. The religious dimensions continue to influence Muslim athletes navigating between sports and politics. When modern Muslim sports stars face pressure to take political stands, many study Muhammad Ali's Uganda visit as both a warning and a guide. His attempt to balance Islamic brotherhood with moral principles remains relevant. Perhaps most significantly, the episode changed how the media covers sports diplomacy. Modern journalists approaching similar situations demonstrate greater awareness of the complexities involved, moving beyond simple narratives of heroes and villains to examine the nuanced realities of sports in international relations. The academic world has also found lasting value in studying this historical meeting. Universities now offer courses analyzing the intersection of sports, politics, and diplomacy, with the Muhammad Ali-Idi Amin encounter serving as a crucial case study. The incident has spawned dozens of scholarly works examining its various dimensions. In Uganda itself, the legacy is particularly poignant. The boxing gym where Muhammad Ali trained during his visit still stands, now serving as both a training facility and informal museum. Young Ugandan boxers train beneath fading photographs of Muhammad Ali and Amin, their mixed legacy a reminder of sports' power to both unite and divide. The diplomatic community has also internalized lessons from this episode. Modern diplomatic protocols for handling high-profile athletic visits to politically sensitive regions often reference the Ali Amin meeting as both a cautionary tale and a learning opportunity. Technology and social media have added new dimensions to such encounters. Modern athletes face instant global reaction to their diplomatic choices, making the careful navigation demonstrated by Muhammad Ali seem almost quaint by comparison. Recent years have seen renewed interest in this historical meeting, particularly as sports figures become increasingly involved in political and social justice issues. Contemporary athletes studying Muhammad Ali's legacy often pause at this episode, recognizing its relevance to their own challenges. The ultimate legacy of Muhammad Ali's Uganda visit may be its demonstration that in the intersection of sports, politics, and morality, there are rarely easy answers. As one modern sports diplomat observed, Muhammad Ali's experience showed us that sometimes the most important diplomatic moments are the ones that make us most uncomfortable. This complex legacy continues to evolve, offering new insights and raising fresh questions for each generation. In an era where sports and politics increasingly intersect, the meeting between the greatest and the dictator remains a powerful reminder of the challenges and responsibilities that come with athletic fame and moral leadership. When Muhammad Ali's plane lifted off from Entebbe Airport in 1975, no one could have predicted how this controversial meeting would echo through history. Nearly 50 years later, this extraordinary encounter between the greatest and the dictator continues to challenge our understanding of sports, politics, and moral responsibility. The meeting forces us to confront uncomfortable questions. When is engagement better than isolation? Can personal diplomacy succeed where official channels fail? What responsibilities do athletes bear when their influence extends beyond sports? These questions, first raised by Muhammad Ali's visit to Uganda, remain startlingly relevant today. Looking back, we see how this event marked a crucial turning point in sports diplomacy. Before Uganda, athletes were often seen as simple goodwill ambassadors. After Uganda, the world recognized the complex political implications of sports celebrities engaging with controversial regimes. The paradox of Muhammad Ali's character was never more evident than during this visit. The man who sacrificed his title to stand against the Vietnam War found himself shaking hands with a dictator. Yet even in this contradiction, we find Muhammad Ali's essential truth, his unwavering belief in the power of direct engagement, even when that engagement proved controversial. For Idi Amin, the visit represented a fleeting moment of international legitimacy before his regime's eventual collapse into complete brutality. Within 4 years, he would be forced into exile, his legacy one of unchecked cruelty and megalomaniacal excess. The photos with Muhammad Ali would become some of the last positive images of his rule. But perhaps the most enduring legacy is how this meeting changed our understanding of sport's role in international relations. Today's athletes, facing decisions about competing in countries with questionable human rights records, still reference Muhammad Ali's Uganda visit as both a warning and a guide. The questions raised by this historic encounter have no easy answers. They challenge us to think deeply about the intersection of athletic fame, political power, and moral responsibility. In an era where sports and politics are increasingly intertwined, these questions become more relevant, not less. As we close this examination of one of history's most unusual meetings, we're left with a final thought. Sometimes the most important moments in history are not those that provide answers, but those that force us to grapple with difficult questions. The day Muhammad Ali met Idi Amin was such a moment, complex, controversial, and ultimately transformative. In the end, this story reminds us that history is rarely simple, heroes are seldom perfect, and the pursuit of peace sometimes requires walking into the heart of darkness. As Muhammad Ali himself often said, the man who views the world at 50 the same as he did at 20 has wasted 30 years of his life. Perhaps this meeting, more than any other moment, proved the wisdom of those words. Before you click away, I want you to know something. This story of Muhammad Ali and Idi Amin isn't just a piece of forgotten history, it's a mirror to our present. Right now, athletes and celebrities are facing similar choices about where to compete, who to endorse, and when to speak up. If this video made you think, if it sparked your curiosity, don't let that energy go to waste. Hit that subscribe button and join our community of history enthusiasts who love diving deep into these fascinating moments that shaped our world. And here's something special. In the comments below, tell me about a modern athlete who you think is facing similar moral dilemmas today. Let's get that conversation going. Remember to ring that notification bell, because next week we're exploring another incredible story that most history books won't tell you about. This is Bites of Goats, where we don't just talk about history, we learn from it. See you in the next one.